Remember Stephanie? The details vary, but many people share Stephanie's perplexity about what has happened in their marriage. One spouse feels that something is missing, but she can't figure out what it is. She gives and sacrifices, honors the commitment, and believes the best. And yet she doesn't achieve intimacy. Or worse than that, she can't avoid pain. In our work with couples over the years, we've observed that while many things go into producing and maintaining love, over and over again, one issue is at the top of the list: boundaries. When boundaries are not established in the beginning of a marriage, or when they break down, marriages break down as well. Or such marriages don't grow past the initial attraction, so that they're never characterized by real and deep intimacy. They never reach the true knowing of each other and the ongoing ability to abide in love and to grow as individuals and as a couple, the long-term fulfillment that's God's design. For this intimacy to develop and grow, there must be good boundaries.
What is a boundary? In the simplest sense, a boundary is a property line. It denotes the beginning and the end of something. Now, if you go down to the county courthouse, you can probably get a plot map that shows your own property lines. You can see where your property begins and your neighbor's ends, a prerequisite for being good neighbors to each other. If you know where the property lines are, you can look up who owns the land and the things like the trees and the bushes that are on it. Well, likewise, in marriage, ownership is very important. If I know where the boundaries are in our marriage, I know who owns things such as feelings and attitudes and behaviors. I know to whom they belong. And if there's a problem with one of those, I know to whom the problem belongs as well. The marriage relationship requires each partner to have a sense of ownership of himself or herself. The first way in which clarifying boundaries helps us is that it defines where one person ends and the other begins. What is the problem? Where is the problem? Is it in you? Is it in me, or both? If we can see that the problem is our problem and that we are responsible for it, then we are in the driver's seat to make change.
Boundaries can foster love, freedom, and responsibility. These three realities have existed since the beginning of time. God created us free. He gave us responsibility for our freedom. And as responsible free agents, we are told to love Him and each other. Something incredible happens as these three ingredients of relationship all work together. As love grows, spouses become freer from the things that enslave, like self-centeredness, sinful patterns, past hurts, and other self-imposed limitations. Then they gain a greater and greater sense of self-control and responsibility. And then, as they act more responsibly, guess what? They become more loving.
Put differently, when spouses are free to not just react to each other, they take responsibility for their own issues, and they love the other person even when he or she doesn't deserve it. Then, free from each other's control, they give love to each other freely, and that love transforms the individuals and produces growth in their marriage.
You're probably wondering what happened to Stephanie and Steve. Well, Stephanie was suffering from the emotional distance that being on the wrong side of a one-sided relationship creates. But Stephanie took some steps to change that relationship. First, she figured out where she ended and where Steve began. And when she did, she realized that there was really very little of her in the marriage. She had adapted to him and had complied to him so much that she could no longer even remember what it felt like to be herself. But she realized that she couldn't blame Steve for her loss of herself. She was the one who, afraid of conflict, had complied with all of his wishes. She had to take ownership of her own passivity.
At this point in her journey, Stephanie made a mature decision. She took responsibility for her own misery and began to work on it in the relationship. She didn't, as many people do, leave the relationship in order to, quote-unquote, find herself. Nothing is further from getting boundaries than leaving a relationship. We believe that boundaries in marriage are about healing and structuring relationships, not about ending them. Stephanie didn't run. Instead, She took ownership of all of her feelings and attitudes, desires and choices. Then she took them to Steve. And they had lots of conflict at first. But in the end, he grew as well. Steve found out that life was not just about him, and that if he continued to live that way, he was going to lose some things very important to him, such as closeness with Stephanie. And as she took responsibility for her life, he was forced to take responsibility for guess whose? His own. And their marriage improved.
Stephanie learned to express her feelings and opinions more. She wouldn't just immediately give in to Steve's desires. When he didn't hear her, she let him know. And Steve learned to love Stephanie's freedom. He began to be attracted by her independence instead of threatened by it as he had been. And as they did these things, their love grew. And they grew as individuals as well. When Stephanie and Steve became more defined, they became two people who could love and be loved. They began to know and enjoy one another. They began to grow. And this is what we would like for you and your spouse. In this series, we will help you become better defined, more free, responsible, and more in a position to love and